So my name's Sarah. I came to London first of all for university. I grew up in the country and had a postcard of London above my desk. I was obsessed with it. And when I came here, I took a lot of wrong turns, which I think really influenced my thinking around failure. I failed a lot when I was younger. And I was a journalist for a long time. I worked in social media. And then eventually I had an email one day from a complete stranger saying, will you come and work for my startup? I had to Google it because I had no idea what it was. So interesting, I didn't know what startup was, and I certainly had no idea that I'd work for Google one day, so that's quite a nice anecdote. I worked for a couple of one-man bands, really, I'd say. And then I went to a startup called Quite, who are German, basically the European version of Yelp, who got acquired by Yelp. And then I came to Google to work on Google Maps and began volunteering at campus, and here I am. But I guess really my passion is community. You don't come to a building like campus for the building or for the name. You come for the people. You come for the network. And I think a really interesting example of that is that Sleda are a campus startup. Founded by an amazing Slovakian guy called Peter. They came to London, and we're so lucky to live here. We've got 90 nationalities based at campus, a huge amount of flux. For me, the most multicultural city of the entire world. They began at campus, they got too big and moved out. We've got a really interesting business model where that's what happens, and I love that. And the founder is now based back in Slovakia and commutes. And again, one of the things you can do at campus is have a flex desk where you're based in Slovakia, but you fly backwards and forwards and drop in and drop out. And I think for them particularly, they've got a really interesting their go-to-market strategy was all around working with event organisers like Marion to get big. They're doing a lot of work over in the Valley at the moment, and a great example. Really pleased that we're using them.
Yeah, very nice. You mentioned that you made some mistakes in terms of your career. Can you mention one or two which you, now looking back, have learned from?
I think everything really. I think what's really interesting about modern careers, you look at our parents' generation or, those who are sort of a certain era, and there was the expectation you'd have one career and you'd stick to it. And I feel whenever I'm asked by press or in interviews, what will you be doing in 5 years' time? I never feel I can give a great answer, because every time either it's an obsession that I don't know about or the career hasn't been invented yet. And I think particularly with journalism, I obsessed about that when I was a kid, obsessed about it. And then I got into it and I found it very slow moving, and I found it very hierarchical, things that I don't personally appreciate in a working culture. And I think certainly I ended up in this weird niche of interviewing celebrities. So I'd be meeting like Zac Efron or Simon Cowell, really not caring less. And I think that's why I did an okay job at it, is I just didn't really care. And I think that taught me a lot. I think certainly that job was all about communicating, and it made me realize really early on, I had a bad manager then, it made me realize how I like to be managed, what kind of culture I like to work in. All of which are things that I really sought when I joined Google, and that's something I found there.
This is quite unique, because you can see the passion in Sarah. And I remember this special event where a few months ago, actually 4 months ago or so, Sarah was hosting at the campus Ariana Huffington, the founder of Huffington Post. And she just released this book called Thrive. And you can see the similar passion from stage. You remember the event, right?
Yeah, that was
fully
cool.
packed. And if you have not checked out campus yet, I totally encourage you to do it, because there are some special events like this. These jewels, people who are going on stage and sharing the knowledge, and you learn not just from the good things they've done, but from the mistakes as well, and how they handled those mistakes. And this is really quite a special place, because many people start going to campus and then at some point they stop. And I think it's a mistake, because there are always these interesting people going there, and Duke of
York.
Any particular place.
Duke of York.
Duke of York is going there as well. So it's really a place where you should go. And talking about this place, Google Campus, how did you get involved with it?
So I guess out of the audience, who's been to campus already? Okay, this is pretty decent odds, right?
And who hasn't?
Yeah.
There you go.
So the one-line pitch about campus is it's Google's 7-story building for entrepreneurs. It's not a Google office. It's not a place where we take equity or hand out money. It very much is intended to be an open source community building. What that means practically is open co-working space, open workspace, 2 or 3 educational events a day, all of which are free. And that varies, as Marion said, from kind of inspiring speakers like Vint Cerf or Ariana Huffington to demo days, hackathons. How I got involved with campus, when I first joined Google, I'd come from several years working in startups, and I loved the sheer impact you can have in a startup. The speed of execution, the fact that you're doing 5 roles at once. And I think the speed certainly was matched at Google. in fact, kind of increased. But I remember distinctly getting an email one day from Easy, my predecessor, saying this campus is coming. And it was an email going out to the entirety of the London office. And I immediately emailed him back and said, how can I help? And we have a quirky thing at Google called 20% time, where you can spend one day a week doing a different project. So I'd been hired to work on Google Maps. So when you're looking for a hairdresser, restaurant, when you're looking on maps, you can see reviews. I've been hired to really build out the program around that in the UK, and then Europe, and then globally. Kind of got bigger. And I loved it, but it was very, I'd been doing that for years. It was part events, part partnerships, part editorial, part really kind of working and building communities. And I really wanted to change sometimes. So I basically went to campus and began running various programs there, and they couldn't get rid of me. It was like every 6 months, I'd be like, shall I carry on doing this or shall I stop? And every time I was like, yes, I'll carry on doing this. And I think particularly with campus, we have a very small team. There's 3 of us full time, but we're very lucky in that we have 16 people who work full time at Google who run programs there. So every Friday morning we run mentoring. It's completely free, by the way. And we bring over 12 to 15 people who work at Google. And the sessions can be around things like AdWords, analytics, how to make the most of Google products, but more often than not, they're things like hiring, legal, marketing, how to pitch an investor. We've done 1,100 sessions so far this year, which, the scale of that simply is amazing, and we would not be able to do that without our volunteers running the programs and corralling Google engineers to get involved.
Yeah. Did you notice something which Sarah said, and this is a pearl to me? Sarah reached out to Easy, asking him how she can help. This is the kind of knowledge which smart people do, because they don't really think about being selfish. They think about helping others, and that's how you get involved.
I guess it was a tiny bit selfish too, because I thought it sounded really fun and really cool. So.
Sure, but you reached out by, how can I help you? And this is something which is quite special. And this is why people at Google, I really like working with them and seeing the results, because they really have this thing on their minds where they want to help. And as you noticed, it's an open source building, so they encourage collaboration and working together. And in terms of this perspective, what is the biggest problem you want to solve with Google Campus?
I think it's that collaboration piece, right? So when I worked for very small startups, not so much at Quite, but like one-man bands, in every case, I was the only woman, I was the only non-developer, and we worked in basements in Shepherd's Bush. No one spoke to each other, really. It was awful. And funnily enough, that startup reared its head again last year with different funding and an entirely different site, and it's doing really well now, and I'm really pleased for them, because it was an amazing idea. I always believed in the idea. You look at 5 years ago in the landscape in London, people weren't talking, every meetup was in a pub. I'd often go along and leave without talking to anyone. It felt so different. And I would go to the US to see friends, and it felt so much more collaborative and open. And I think the UK and London in particular, and I want to make sure that, I think there's so much focus on London, but there's so much good stuff happening around the rest of the UK. I met a few guys earlier, from Cambridge and from Manchester. I think what campus has done well, and I think the timing was perfect. It wasn't just campus. Everything was changing in London at the time. Physical space really matters, Tech is a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful tool, but you can't always replicate that feeling of meeting someone face to face, the eye contact, the things that come up in conversation that you necessarily wouldn't happen online. And I think our biggest challenge is when you're working for a startup, at the very beginning, you're learning all the time, right? You're meeting everyone, you're trying to hire the first person, you're learning. And when you're out meeting investors, you're talking to everyone again. But there's this gap in the middle when your head is down building. And it needs to be down building, but at the same time, that's often a phase where you need to also be asking questions. And I think for us at campus, the biggest challenge that I think we're trying to solve is, how do you get started, but also how do you scale? And those are 2 different challenges with 2 different answers, and we don't know the answers, we're trying to work on them. And I think with the getting started piece, that's where putting people together in a building matters. A lot of our community, we've got 35,000 members, a lot of our community are not based full-time at campus. They're coming in from Wira, they're coming in from Techstars, they're coming in from various co-working spaces and kitchens. The whole point of campus is it's what you make of it. Out of the programs that the campus team offers, and we probably offer out of the 850 events we've had so far this year, probably only about 50 or 60 are done by my team. The rest are led by the community. But most of those are still around starting up, like Campus for Mums, a program that I worked on in London last year, which is a baby-friendly pre-incubator. But we're thinking more about that scaling piece. In London, I feel like still in Europe, that's our big challenge. How do you really scale? How do you turn into a real company from a startup?
Yeah. I had the pleasure of meeting some of the moms from this campus for moms. Sarah introduced me. Those are the most productive people you will ever meet.
It's because they've got a baby in one hand and an iPad in the other, right?
And they are passionate about building the idea, and they can do it in these few hours they have time.
So how many of the audience have children? Quite a lot. How many of the audience are full-time carers that have kids? So this is the interesting, okay, one at the back. But this is the interesting thing, right? And I think, so the point with mums, and I feel like I need to apologize for the name, men are welcome. We have about 10% men, so I'm sorry, dads. I think increasingly stay-at-home parents or full-time carers have really specific challenges around time. It's a great time to reevaluate your life. And really selfishly, one of the reasons why we started that is we have, I think the last official stats are 20% women in campus, but actually the latest survey we're doing puts us slightly higher than that. You know, we have this growing community who are not the standard really young guys. We're trying to work out how we serve that community and how we help them get started.
Okay. So when you talk about campus, when you started 2 years ago,
yeah.
How did the original vision change until today?
So I guess the idea for campus, it just came about. It was a very serendipitous time. I think a lot of people who work at Google have come from startups. A lot of people who work in Google are passionate about startups. We're unusual in that we're still run by our founders 16 years on. Our founders are only in their early 40s, which makes me feel like I've not done enough with my life by quite a long way. And I think at the same time, the government, particularly George Osborne, David Cameron, were doing a lot of work around the idea of Tech City. And I think the best thing Tech City did is it packaged up what was happening in this area in a really press-friendly way. I mean, there's everything else, like the SCIS for tax breaks for angel investors, the entrepreneur visa. But the Tech City initiative really was starting at the same time that we were thinking internally, what more can we do in London? And I think London was really appealing to us because of various factors. We've got a massive office here. When I first joined Google, there were 750 of us. There's now 2,500. Wow. The office has grown so fast. When I first began, it was one building. Now it's like 3, and King's Cross soon to come. There's a density of established companies in London that you don't really see in many other cities around the world. If you think about it logically, with the US, you've got the film companies in LA, you've got tech and SF, you've got media and finance in New York, you've got Chicago with huge amounts of industry. In London, you've got all of those in quite a small city. There's 9 million of us, of course, but geographically speaking, the centre of town is quite small. And particularly this area, you've got all the money of the city over east, and you've got the creative agencies of Soho. We're right in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. So I think there was that piece, and then there was the density of startups. So like I said, increasingly I was going to meetups in 2011, 2010, and everywhere I went, I would meet young companies trying to get started that were blocked. So we kept thinking, what do those companies need? And a large part of the story of campus is we began, we already had a partnership with Tech Hub, who are our partners at campus. They run an amazing co-working space. And really, I think of them as being a community within a community. We began talking to people and understanding what was needed. And by people, I mean like VCs, big companies, small companies, people just getting started. Developers, for example, that's a really important community to us because of the dearth of technical founders. And they all said the same thing. They all said space. So we thought, okay, what can we do as Google? And then at the same time, this building came up, 7 stories on Bonhill Street, seemed kind of big. We were like, oh my God. And we thought, okay, we'll do it. And we began basically understanding what that space should look like. So we have the cafe space that's run by our partners Dose, who provide wonderful coffee. And really that space, anybody can sign up, get a membership, come along and use it. And campuslondon.com, you just go there, get a membership card. 35,000 of them are existing in the world. And I think the benefit of that is some people use that full-time for space, but a lot of other people just pop in when they're in that part of town. You can have meetings there. We have a device lab. There's a jobs board. Then Tech Hub came into the picture. They run co-working spaces. They've now got spaces in Bangalore, Bucharest, Riga, Swansea, and they've got a couple of other spaces in London. And what I think is exciting about that, they've got 200 desks over the road. They charge $275 a month for desk Wi-Fi coffee, which is actually very affordable for London. What's exciting about that is often companies move into campus when they're quite small, like 1 or 2 desks. And when they get big, naturally they move out for their own space. But as we all know, space in London is really expensive. So the beauty of Tech Hub having 2 larger spaces on Old Street Roundabout and down the road in Shoreditch, which is brand new, is that a lot of their larger alumni, there's some space down here as well, by the way. Yeah. He's like, please ignore me.
Simone.
Sorry. The beauty of that means that companies that are really scaling up fast, and I'm thinking of like FlackHub, who won a Tech City News award last week for fastest growth. They're basically an Airbnb for corporate lets. They've now got a 30-person office in Tech Hub, Old Street Roundabout. And what I love about that is, I'm often asked, you know, who do your community really admire? Is it Steve Jobs? And I'm like, well, Steve Jobs is obviously a wonderful person, was a wonderful person, but you need to have a local hero, right? You need someone who's 6 months down the road from you or a year down the road from you, based in your city, who you can physically meet and ask questions of. And that's the beauty of that, right? Yeah. And then Seedcamp, obviously, you know, an amazing European fund. They've picked 130 companies so far to invest in. You know, 86% of whom go on to get further follow-up funding. You know, their companies, again, are at this kind of scale-up inflection point. And for us, it was really important to have partners. It was really important to have a mix. It was really important to, I think it's the ecosystem, right? So you've got people who are just starting out. You've got Seedcamp companies who are scaling. You've got Tech Hub who are sort of serious head down stage. A lot of investors come to campus. We have our investor office hours every month, and that's a chance really to get feedback on what you're doing. With the open access event space, it's free to host an event, by the way. There's a massive influx of people of all kinds hosting events. And that's people like, I went to an event last night by a Japanese accelerator. You know, we've got 2 events happening tonight. We've got Richard Hinter, who's the CEO of Saatchi in London, talking about his new book, Consigliere, Leading from the Shadows. It sounds pretty exciting to me. You know, the sheer mix is what makes campus unique, I think. Yeah.
So you're mentioning these office hours.
Marion, please interrupt me if I keep talking.
I just want to make sure we pull out those calls from there. So if there are any startups here who are interested into those investor hours, how do they apply?
It's basically all done on the website, and I have to apologise for the website. We've got a new one coming soon because the current one is not as perhaps we would like it. Everything's done online. You don't need to be a member to sign up for the office hours or the mentoring on Fridays. And I think the whole point of the investor office hours, I remember the last time I sat in on a pitch in 2010, I was terrified. I'd never met an investor before. I had no idea what to expect or what kind of stats they would be looking for, what traction. And I think the whole point of this program, it came from partly from the community asking for it, but also partly from the sheer number of investors that we kept bumping into at events. So after a while we said, how can we get you down here and get you talking to startups? It's not a pitch session. It's all about asking for feedback. And I think the main thing that's come out of those sessions is it takes the pain away, but also it makes a lot of companies realize they're not ready to seek funding yet. And if you're not ready to seek funding, then you concentrate on building.
Okay. Another thing you mentioned was these co-working spaces.
Yeah.
WeWork, I don't know if you guys know WeWork. WeWork just raised last week 355 million.
They're amazing.
And why is this such a big industry now?
So I guess part of it is, and I think that's a really interesting point for 2 reasons. I'll start with the positive. I love WeWork. I'm a really big fan of theirs. They're growing so fast, and particularly Deb, who's in charge of the London HQ, is ex-campus. You know, she used to run up in campus, so she used to run Startup Weekend for Europe. A wonderful person and a very strong community builder as well. So I think they've really got community at heart. I think part of it is London is really expensive, right? It's crazy expensive, and when you're growing, if you can pull your resources in a smart way, you know, handling bills, utilities, facilities, building breaking down, that's not very exciting. For any startup founder, you want to focus on the build first. Focus on the things, you know, anything you can outsource, you will. I think that's one reason. Yeah. I think the second reason is groups can do what individuals can't. You know, I'm a really strong believer in that. So for example, my background is very sort of community, content, marketing, social focused. I am absolutely terrible at things like business planning. I don't have the experience of that. If I'm sat opposite someone who does know that, can't we skill share and swap that? Doesn't that make a lot more sense rather than paying someone? I think there's that piece as well. But I think with WeWork, I think something that I'm really intrigued by is how many people in co-working spaces struggle to really get their head down. I think something we're thinking about is that mix of private and public. And I was talking to a chap earlier from a massive solicitors in London who was saying he's got this massive open plan office, which looks great, but when he wants to get serious work done, particularly for him with the confidentiality around his work, how does he do that? So I think you have to have mixed spaces. That's my favorite. Open when it's needed, and the ability to find closed space too. Okay, and Google, you have this campus, and you have 2 other elements, which is Google Ventures, and you have Google for Entrepreneurs. Can you just explain to us
the differences?
I know, it's confusing. So the team that I work for is Google for Entrepreneurs. There are 11 of us now. We're quite a small team. We're headquartered in Mountain View. And I guess what Google for Entrepreneurs does, very straightforward, we empower and advance early stage entrepreneurs throughout the world. And we do that through two things. The first of which is campus, which is own spaces. So we have campus in London, that's our first, campus Tel Aviv. And next year we're launching campuses in Warsaw, Madrid, Sao Paulo and Seoul. And I'm really excited about that because first of all, we're following the model of London. That's extremely flattering. And I think there's a huge scope there to connect the dots. There's a huge scope there, particularly in Europe where we're so geographically close. I think you look at Madrid and Warsaw and particularly, you know, they both have such strengths and such opportunities. You know, you look at Madrid and the strong focus around IoT, the fact that it's a very scrappy community that gets so much done with so little, and particularly with the current economic situation over there, people are really turning to entrepreneurship as you know, rather than battle it out trying to get a job, they're just starting companies right away.
How do you select the spots? Where do you want to be? What's the criteria?
I think first of all, density of startups. Second of all, number of industries that are established there. Third of all, Google Office. You know, we have to have that infrastructure behind us to help out. With Warsaw, really, it was the technical universities were really appealing to us. We kept hearing from people that, you know, any Eastern European technical founder tends to go to Berlin or Warsaw. You know, we have a partner in Berlin, the factory, who are amazing. I think Warsaw was very exciting from us from a technical point of view, but also because we kept meeting people who said, there is nothing like this here. There is no space. And that's things like we've got North America, we've got the North America Tech Hub Network. And that's amazing places like Capital Factory in Austin, 1871 in Chicago. These are part co-working spaces, part accelerators across all of America doing amazing stuff, and particularly Galvanize in San Francisco. They're amazing. There's no way that a campus would really...
So you need elsewhere,
we would never want that to compete.
US.
But we also have partners like Fishburners in Sydney, which is an amazing co-working space, Gaza Sky Geeks, Gaza's only accelerator. You know, with this partner program, it's about getting scale and about supporting best in class. So for example, Startup Grind, you guys are our partners. It's about supporting best in class people who are doing things, whether it's community events, whether it's accelerators, incubators, or co-working spaces.
So what are you hoping to get from the network of campuses?
I think something that's been really successful for us this year that we really want to expand on is the partner network. So if you're looking at North America, there's been some great examples. We've got this North America passport scheme, which means that if you belong to Capital Factory, you can travel all across, you can literally backpack across the US working from various Google for Entrepreneurs spaces. And every space has its, you know, they're all gorgeous spaces. And a lot of them are kind of old economy, new economy. So you look at our space in, I think, Minneapolis, and it's the ex-grain store, and it's now a fabulous co-working space. So I think part of that is when you land in a new city, where do you go? Who do you meet? Who do you talk to? And with Europe, it's kind of a small network. It's just us, Paris and Berlin, Tel Aviv now. And I'm going to include Tel Aviv just because Eurovision does. So I think for the purposes of today, you know, I think with Madrid and Warsaw coming online, there's scope for us to be doing a lot more. And we actually we're testing a few things right now. There's a lot more to come. We're still trying to work out the best way to do this. We had our first live stream demo day using Slido. And I think part of that, we always get this question, how can we give feedback from home? So we had a campus demo night. We got feedback from like Aberdeen, Norway, all over the place. And we're actually talking to Numa right now about doing London versus Paris quite soon. But I see us doing London and Warsaw, but you know, Warsaw, Madrid. There's a lot of scope there to be getting that feedback from different cities. And what's exciting from a business point of view is ultimately, we know that, for example, IoT is huge in Madrid. If you're IoT, why don't you go to Madrid and work there? Why don't you get investment there? You know, you can slice and dice the silo data and see who backs who. And I think the second part there is we recently ran a program called Campus Exchange, which basically crowdsourced, you know, 6 European amazing startups through our partner network, all of whom are heading towards Series A, all of whom have serious traction, like up to 1 million downloads. And it was 2 weeks of really intensive mentoring in London. All of them had follow-up meetings with London investment companies. I think part of that for us is understanding how we can bring Europe closer together, how we can help companies scale. I see that in the future being Campus Exchange Seoul. If you're an amazing mobile company, why don't you go to Seoul? That's exactly what they do.
And the last piece is the Google Ventures part.
So basically my team roll up to Ventures. My boss, Mary Grove, who's amazing, reports to Bill Maris. And I think with Ventures, that's really the kind of venture wing of Google. There is, Google Ventures in Europe has just opened up its first office with 4 partners, one of whom, Easy, knows campus extremely well, having been the previous head of campus. And I think what's really exciting about that is they released their annual report today of what they did this year, and it was seriously impactful. So I think it was something like 16 exits, companies like Slack, Medium, Uber, Product Hunt. If you look at I think it's gv.com/2014, it's really worth looking at their report this year because you get a sense of the kind of scope of what they do. So part of that's the investment piece, but also it's bringing the Google resources, right? So things like our training around unconscious bias, our training around how to set goals, OKRs we call them, objective key results. How we can help those companies, whether it's on hiring, whether it's on UX, whether it's on recruitment. We haven't announced our first investment yet in Europe, but I'm sure that's coming soon. And I think it's a massive signal for how we're thinking about Europe from the Google side. Between announcing a pot of money that big, between having our campus HQ here, I think next year's going to be really massive for Google in Europe.
Yeah, and they have $100 million, which they invested.
125 actually.
125.
Yeah.
Wow, so it's even bigger. And they looking to invest it in London or in Europe or what?
In Europe, yeah.
In Europe.
And I think, because I don't work on that team, I don't want to speak for them, but from what I've heard, it's going to be a European-wide scope. If you look at the breakdown in the US, they've invested so far, I think 34% in life sciences, 26% in mobile. There are certain trends that the West Coast team seem to really pick up on, but the European team have different backgrounds, so who knows? Yeah.
So because we have the by far most popular question so far on Slido, which is how can a London startup pitch to Google Ventures, and at which stage does the startup needs to be?
So I think stage is a really interesting question. They're pretty early stage Google Ventures. We have Google Capital who specialize in like mega late stage funding. Yeah. I think the best thing with that is get on their radar. There are 4 partners, all of whom are very well known. Easy is very active on Twitter, as are Tom, Peter, and Avid. I'm sure a lot of you in this room know those guys personally. I think get on their radar first of all and ask them. I think because I don't work on that team, I can't speak for them, but I know particularly Easy. They're very open to being emailed, they're very open to being spoken to. I think in terms of stage, it's about having serious traction, right? And serious growth opportunities. Okay, and
in terms of the investments from Google Ventures, my favorite, I have to admit, is a company called Nest. Google Ventures bought them for $3 billion. And I totally love the way they approach the Internet of Things and the smart homes. I think there's going to be some amazing things happening there. Now moving on to the campus and the smartness between the campuses. Is there anything you're really hoping for as the higher level of intelligence?
Yeah, I think we're still working on so many things, and because at the moment, where we are with most campuses is really focusing on the kind of partner and hiring piece. That's, like I said, it's really all about people for me. Yeah. I think it's all about, finding those figureheads. I think there's a lot more we can do there. Like I said, we're revamping all of our websites. I think something we're really keen to understand is if you're working in London and you're doing UX, you want to meet someone doing UX in Warsaw, how do we facilitate that? I think there's got to be a smart way of doing that. We're just figuring it out right now. I think more to come is the main answer. We're always testing things. It's just often they don't,
Yeah, and you mentioned collaboration on the scale of 1 to 10. Where do you rate Google Campus right now?
I think I'd probably put us at a 7. I think we've done loads of good work around collaboration, but I think as with anything, there's always room to grow. I think one really interesting thing that struck me is 2 guys who work at campus met at an event and got talking, and elsewhere in London, I should add, and realised they sit 2 desks apart from each other and they'd never spoken. You know how it goes, guys, right? And they built an app called Coffee Labs. And what I like about this is it's classic campus, hack it overnight. And what they did is they came to us and said, what it does is it's an algorithmic coffee match. So basically you sign up to it and you get matched with somebody completely strange. And I think what's nice about that, 2 things that are nice. First of all, really fast to execute. Second of all, there's a lot of bias that goes on, right? If I get an email out of the blue from somebody for a coffee, a lot of the time I might be like, oh, is it worth my while? Awful thing to say, but you think that. And I think what's really nice about this particular hack is it takes away all of that. It's all about the willing. If you're signing up to it, it presupposes you want to meet strangers for coffee. So basically what we did is we gave them 500 free coffees and sent it out into the world.
Oh wow, that's nice.
Yeah, and I think I've met 4 people so far from campus, one of whom I've met before, but the other 3 were complete strangers. And I think what's nice is our community is so broad these days that I think just really nice things are going to come of it. And I think what's also nice is the 2 founders both have other startups startups, one of whom won Le Web last week, so no slouch really, doing pretty well, I would say. Duke Deck, really great company. But they're now looking at white labeling. So any of you that work for massive corps that have this challenge around communication, I used to work for the BBC years ago, and it was such a massive company. It was so hard to work out who to speak to. So they're currently talking to companies like that, white labeling the product, sending it out. I think there's a lot of potential there for it to be bought by larger. So any of you that are keen on meeting those guys, please, I'm really keen to help them out because I think what they've done is really interesting.
That's very interesting.
Coffee Labs.
Now talking about campus, when you said you have 35,000 members, and there were over 100,000 people who walked through the door last year. We have startups in the audience who are building their products, and they stuck at the stage where they want to build the audience.
Yeah.
What is your advice? How did you make it to 35,000 people?
I think that's a really interesting question because it's so hard to do. So I guess, and I guess the most recent example I have when I joined Google is I joined Google I was working for a German startup called Quite. I basically had built up, I worked for the UK wing of a review site, and we built up a decent community. And the community that I was really proud of, all of whom were, you know, passionate reviewers who loved local places. And I basically got an offer from Google that I couldn't say no to go and do the same thing. But I was starting absolutely from scratch. But I had a big name behind me, so it's not really the same, is it? You know, I did start from scratch, but it wasn't quite the same. I think it's all about, first of all, it's all about the product, right? The product has to be good. You can't sell something rubbish, basic.
True.
But once you've got your product, it's all about, I think a lot of founders forget about the go-to-market piece, right? Because especially technical founders, they love building, and they're like, here's my app, go out into the world. And then they're like, oh, we've only had 6 downloads. You know, it's extremely stressful. This is why the best founders that I've met keep firing themselves and hiring people who have the skills they don't. And that's something that's very hard to do because it involves being deeply humble at your very core.
Yeah.
And, you know, building something is very personal. You feel like you own it. You want to keep the ownership piece in check. I think building an audience, first of all, when you're building it, the most important thing to do is get that feedback, get the user feedback, and that's how you start building your audience. So whether it's an app, whether it's a product, start talking to people who are going to use it.
So you're talking about your family, your friends, or beyond them?
Beyond them. It can't be, you know, your mum, the mum test, for example. Your mum is always going to say, darling, it's great, if she's nice. You know, I think get out there, talk to strangers, talk to people who will use your product. Yeah. If they tell you they will not use your product, listen to them. That's the biggest signifier. I think when you're doing that user feedback, that's how you build your, whether it's an email list, whether it's people that you know that will use it. That's when you start saying to people, well, I'm going to be launching for real in a few months' time. And then you have your beta launch and you start going out there and you do something, you know, whether it's doing something really clever within the app, so member get member schemes. And I'm not always a fan of those. I think it has to be very smart. You know, I think it has to be a genuine incentive. It has to be genuinely share this with your friends because you like it. And when you're doing the beta, keep seeking feedback. You have to adjust your product all the time. You can't just release it. So the product, you adjust it according to the feedback, and what happens then? How do you get to from 20 people to 1,000? Yeah, well, that's the hard piece, right? You start small with your user group, you get them to incentivize and start spreading the word, and then you start thinking about your marketing piece. And I am not a fan of paid for marketing. That's just, you know, I don't really like advertising. Totally agree. I never think that, I've seen so few examples of that working in a really smart way. I think it's time to hit social media. It's time to hit the communications and PR piece. And I feel like a lot of startups struggle with the press piece, and we're actually going to be doing more events about this in the next year because having been a journalist, I know how deeply lazy we are and how easily we can be sold to. So I feel sure that there's more there we can do. I think hit social media and really get people who love your product talking for you. I think something that's been really successful at campus is, you know, we try and have tried really hard to listen to our audience and respond to them. And I think people genuinely respond well to that and talk about us. And we're very lucky. We've had loads of great press, and also some bad press. But also, look, we've had loads of our community talk about us and feel grateful for the help that we've given them. And I think it's all about that, right? It's all about the word of mouth. I don't know about you, but the first time, I remember so well, the first time I heard about Instagram, a fashion blogger that I know and love was like, Sarah, you've got to try this. And I loved it. I was like, yes, this is so great. Fashion, you know, like sharing things that quickly really appeals to me. It's all about the usability, right? Yeah. That was kind of a rant, sorry. Yeah.
What you're saying is, it fits very nicely to, you said earlier, you have to do things which you build a product and then things that scale. And there's this interesting piece on startupclass.co, which is a startup university for free from Stanford. And Paul Graham wrote this piece about doing things that don't scale.
Yeah.
Right? And there he encourages doing things which you can't scale, but you have to do. Because like Sarah said, she doesn't really believe in paid marketing.
That's just my personal opinion, though.
I totally agree, and he agrees as well.
Yeah.
And what he says is, go out there, go to the coffee shops and speak to people, get the feedback. And if you think your product is amazing, help them download your application, help them use it. And there's this Stripe test from Y Combinator, which, you know, the company Stripe, right? Multi-billion company now, 2 Irish guys. And what they did, they actually helped people. They told them about the application they have. It's a payment solution. And they said, you know what, let me set it up for you. They took the laptop of the people they were speaking to and set it up right there.
Yeah. Although actually, I would say, so getting trained up as a user researcher is one of the best things I ever did. You know, I always had I'm just a very nosy person. But years ago when I worked for a very small startup, I went out and ran user testing and I had no idea what I was doing. But actually, it's as simple as giving someone a tablet and saying, show me how you do this, and you are not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to say why, you know, you're allowed to say why you're doing that, why you're doing this, but you're not allowed to give hints. And I think a lot of the time, where they go and how they behave will really surprise you, because ultimately, we're in a very tech-heavy bubble, right? We all use products like this the entire time, and that does, for your first 1,000 users, they will be those people in that bubble. But if you want to truly scale, you have to go out and do user testing elsewhere. Yeah. And I think running the user testing yourself as a founder is so critical, because you're not allowed to say, I don't agree with you. You're not allowed to say, this is why I did this. You just have to listen. And I think listening well is the most important skill founders have to have. Mm-hmm. We know better, innately better than anyone, what we're capable of. Yeah. I really believe that.
So you mentor some people as well?
I do, yeah.
Do you happen to hear about some bad advice from your mentees, from other people?
Well, so I guess the best advice I got from someone who was an ex-boss of mine years ago. So one of my wrong turns in my career was I ended up managing a clothing shop for 2 years, vintage clothes. It's a long story.
Oh, wow.
And I really wanted to be a journalist. I was in my early 20s, and I basically didn't have the confidence to just go for it. And I obsessed, and I wrote for art magazines at the time. I wasn't making any money. And I had this really great appraisal with my boss, who was quite a difficult person, one could say. And she said to me, what you have to realize, Sarah, is that you're not a journalist, you manage a clothing shop. And I quit the next morning. I was working at The Guardian within a month. It really was such a massive reality check.
Wow.
Because I thought, my God, I manage a clothing shop. This is not what I want to be doing with my life. And I think when you hear that kind of strong negative feedback, it makes you think. But I think with mentoring, it's often about the chemistry. I think you need mentors that truly will understand the very specific needs you have. And so, for example, someone I'm mentoring right now is 17, and the reason that we just got on really well. You know, there was a clear chemistry there. He's an amazing guy who, you know, I have a lot of formal education, he doesn't. And I think that mix is quite interesting, because he has no fear, and I really respect and admire that, and I've learned a lot from working with him. Mm-hmm. And he's working on a company called Super Academy, which is basically a Khan Academy for entrepreneurs in the UK. And I think how I've been able to help him is negotiating things like funding, things like going in and pitching to Facebook and getting sponsorship, which he doesn't have as much experience of. I think it's about those very specific needs. Yeah. And a lot of the time with mentoring, for me, the best mentors I've had have been people that I've just met casually, and it's ended up, so the person that interviewed me on the way into Google, for example, I kept having lunch with him early on, and then I realized he was a director, and I just hadn't realized how senior he was, because he's so friendly and so nice. And he's a very good friend. He's given me a lot of wonderful advice with my career without it really ever being formalized, but I consider him a mentor, absolutely. Mm-hmm. He's someone that I find very inspiring, certainly.
And in terms of mentorship, would you call those office hours a mentorship sessions, or how do you tackle mentorship in campus? We
call it mentoring, but I guess it's very lightweight, it's one-off. I think for us, mentoring is such a personal and subjective thing. We don't presume that we can find you a mentor. The whole point of those topics are to help you find specific advice around a particular topic. Yeah. Now, I can think of at least 10 examples where mentoring has come from that, but it takes time, right? So I think particularly what you and Derek are working on with Startup Grind, the online mentoring platform, which for those of you that haven't signed up, I really advise you. It's really interesting. I don't think I'm fully signed up on the platform yet, but I filled out the form. I think what's interesting there is, whether you're looking for a mentor or looking for a mentee, it takes time. And a really interesting anecdote around this is last year I ran a mentoring session at Google HQ, a training session, and I was looking for mentors and mentees. And it struck me as really, for the women at Google, it struck me as really interesting that most senior female Googlers signed up as mentees, not mentors. And these are women who are at the top of their game, really inspiring, and they're still looking for mentors.
That's interesting.
So I think we need to obsess less about mentors and look at our peers. You know, look at our peers, trust ourselves, and really understand why we want a mentor. What is the need that we're looking to solve there?
Wow, that's quite interesting. And when it comes to campus, do you see yourself as important to promote the mentorship part, or you just want to go for the lightweight?
So I guess it depends on what stage you are with your company. I think there are always quick fixes you need, and that's where the Friday sessions come in. And I think particularly if we look at repeat numbers, we know people tend to come to 2 or 3 times a year when they have a need they want to fix. And I think particularly if you're on our newsletter, you can see what's coming up. It's very straightforward. You just sign up for those particular sessions. There are certain campus startups that I've mentored in the past where I have a deeper relationship with them. It just depends on what they need, really.
So when these startups come to the campus and they kind of grow up in there, what happens to them afterwards? Well,
so that's really interesting. I think what's nice about our business case is when they get big, they move out, but they remain part of our alumni. So for example, and I'm thinking of companies like TransferWise, Borrow My Doggy, you know, TransferWise valued at $1 billion last time I saw in the press. Borrow My Doggy, you know, I think they're at Series C at the moment. You know, companies that are doing astoundingly well, BuzzRadar, who do all the screens in campus, they remain part of our community. And I think particularly, I was emailing a startup today who've just begun at Y Combinator, who, and I'm not allowed to say their name because it's all under the hat at the moment. They've just gone to Y Combinator, and I think for us, you know, we're always so proud of their success. And I think it's so exciting seeing companies start. This particular company began in the café in the first 6 months of campus and doing really well right now. And I think that's just a great story, right? I think, you know, you want companies to grow and get big. And if companies fail, you want them to try again. I think particularly something Tech Hub are doing right now that I love is Startup Funeral. And it's where you get founders, and I just saw one in the audience. Yeah, it's really cool. And I think what's nice about that is the way that we as Europeans think about failure. I think we're coming on leaps and bounds. So I'm doing a lot of work with Korea right now. We're having a lot of groups from Korea coming. And one of the questions I always get asked is failure. You know, what happens when you fail? And I think what's really nice about the community in London is how, you know, 75% stats-wise, they fail. You have to learn from that. You have to grow from that. Stats show second or third time founder is far more likely to be successful. So Startup Funeral, which is run by our partners Tech Hub, you've got a couple of founders talking about why they failed. It's all about the learning process, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. Campus is a special place, maybe partly also because it's Google, but apart from being part of Google, what makes it so special? What makes you think that it has its place in London where you have so many other places like that?
No, I think firstly, the rise of other places is very exciting to us. You know, more desks means more startups. And I think there are so many specialists who are doing like Level 39 that are the best for fintech. Trampoline are really good at the kind of arty side of things. I think with campus, what's good is we don't specialize. People always say to me, oh, it's the first place I came when I thought I'd quit my job. You know, if you're working in a building full of people who've quit their jobs, that's pretty inspiring from my point of view.
Yeah.
I think we don't specialize. For the most part, campus is early stage. We help you grow, and I think that's a great thing. We're there, whatever you need, we're there to help you understand what you need. I think that's special.
It is, yeah. It is kind of special. When you speak with these startups who are based at the campus or coming to visit, are there any common mistakes you can see them doing over and over again?
I mean, I guess there are similar pain points around finding the right CTO, scaling, always a challenge, you know, growing big. I think common mistakes are giving away too much equity in the first round. And I think that's something that I'm thinking about more, you know, we're thinking about more and more in terms of, I was at a great accelerator summit last week, and I think, you know, if you're a first-time founder, you're often self-funded.
Yeah.
And I think when you're self-funded, the temptation to give away 15% for a lot, you know, for a small amount of money that will keep you going is very strong.
So how much is too much?
I don't know. That's so individual. I don't know. If you're a fintech company or a pharma tech company, the amount you need to get started is really high. Whereas if you're, say, you're fashion tech or, you know, another area, you can start quite scrappy, really. But I think what's challenging with that equity piece is when you go to second round funding, it's harder for the big investors to take you seriously. And I think that's a challenge. And I think hopefully that's something that coming along to an event to understand what funding is and what it means, hopefully we can help with that piece.
Hopefully, yes.
I mean, that's something that I see as a common challenge. I think the other part is co-founders who don't sign agreements. I've seen a couple of nasty co-founder breakups.
So you advise to just always sign
I think you have to, right? So I guess, you know, finding it, yeah, it's a prenup. It's totally a prenup. And I speak with experience. My dad founded a company when I was a teenager without signing a contract, and that ended badly.
Yeah.
You know, so I think having seen that firsthand as a teenager, and also in campus, I think a lot of the time the most successful co-founders have a deep, you know, they've worked together in a previous job, they met at university, they know each other inside out, because ultimately, you know, when you're starting a company, it's long hours, you're very emotionally invested. And if you, at your very core, have a change of heart about how the company or the product goes, that can, you know, that can lead to really big differences of opinion.
So it's useful to sign something.
I think so. That's just something I think personally is important.
So running this building, which you say collaboration and sharing is important to you, have you learned some eye-opening facts of how to promote this collaboration and sharing and I do this for you, you do this for me.
Yeah.
How can you promote this?
You know, I think I learn something new every day there. It's been actually 6 months this week that I joined campus, very exciting.
Oh.
And I think the thing that I learned is you can't always formalize these things, right? Some people like sharing, some people don't. You can't force these things, you can't mandate it. It really has to, if you try and put in a culture that encourages sharing, some people will share. That's the kind of thing we've learned, but there's no hard and fast rule. And I think we're always tweaking what we do in terms of programs, always tweaking what we do in terms of events, even posters around the building. You know, it's as simple as that, right? I think 500 free coffees, that was so big. That was huge for our community, and I realized it's all about the small gesture, right? I love a free coffee. That gets me up in the morning, you know, free coffee. Funnily enough, I was talking to Alex today, who's the founder of Lightspark, who began his company at Cambridge Innovation Centre and is now based at campus. And he said to me, when I moved to London, I wanted somewhere like that, and campus was the natural choice. And I thought that was so lovely. And I think it's that, right? It's what's exciting for me is I can go to an event at campus and I'll meet startups, right? But I'll also meet investors. I'll meet service providers like graphic designers for startups, lawyers for startups, and I'll meet people who, and what's really exciting to me is I'll meet people who work at places like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey who are thinking about leaving, or who are basically staying at Goldman Sachs but want to learn. And I think that is really exciting. All of you who are here from big companies but are here to meet entrepreneur speakers, that's exciting, right? Yeah. It shows that the way that we're thinking about business is you know, it's about sharing between types of company. Because when I first graduated, when I first entered the world of work, we looked up to the big companies. We thought that they had nothing to learn from us. I think it's very exciting and disruptive.
Yeah. Are we having anybody from the big company here tonight?
I've met a few.
Any big corporation?
Yeah.
Hands up. So we have a handful, right? A few of them. Don't forget tonight's hashtag is StartupGrind. Feel free to tweet. It's gonna appear over there. We'll soon be jumping into the Slido questions. Before we go and ask the questions from Slido, I wanna ask Sarah about if I'm a startup and I'm looking for funding. How do you keep investors close to you? Seed stage,
it depends.
Angels,
it depends on what kind of funding you're after. I think angel funding is really, we're doing a lot more with angels in the next year, because with angels a lot of the time we've found many of our entrepreneurs seem to get that through an introduction, which is great, but something that's very core to campus is diversity. Not everyone has that introduction. How can we as campus help facilitate that?
That's a very good point.
So I think firstly with an investor, it's a bit like dating, right? You have to show them your attraction. You have to keep them excited about what you're doing. You have to be talking to them, in my opinion, before you're at a critical stage. If you're seeking funding and you've got a month's runway, then obviously you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And I think particularly with VCs, it's finding the right VC is everything. You know, all it takes sometimes is having the right introduction to the right person. Because every fund has its specialisms. Every fund, if they've just invested in a company just like yours, they might not take you on. So I think it's about keeping up information. Information is power. We all know that. You know, really doing your research and knowing who invests in what, knowing who they've recently invested in, what kind of support they provide. If you just want smart money with an advisor that's quite hands-off, you can find that in lots of places. But if you want something more hands-on, and particularly with ventures, their approach is they'll help you with hiring, with UX, all of that kind of thing. And the companies that get that, I think they've been able to have a great impact. I think first of all, it's about doing your research. Second of all, it's about knowing when to approach them. And I think also it's about, you know, maybe the first investor you speak to isn't the right one, but they might know someone. So I think giving yourself time to focus on that, because funding is really a full-time job. I think anyone in the audience knows that. When you're funding, you're not building. Yeah. Particularly if you're a one-person team, because a lot of VCs do not like one-person teams for that exact reason.
That's true. That's true. We had John Brett from Techstars last month here, and he was saying that he would not fund himself because he was a sole founder. So a team is a big asset. Since you are part of Google Ventures, how are you keeping close? Like, are they having any office hours at the campus? Or?
So I guess the answer on that is we'll be doing a lot more next year. Nothing I can confirm right now, I'm afraid, but it's something we're really thinking about. I think for the time being, because they only really got started in the autumn, we'll be doing a lot more work next year.
Okay, nice. If you're interested in hearing more about the ventures, we hold this conference every year in February, on the 9th of February till 11th. Bill Murray, who is the head of Google Ventures, he's going to be speaking there, so feel free to come.
And Bill is an amazing speaker. I do work with him, but I really rate him as a speaker. It's wonderful.
Now, looking into the future, what do you see as the key trends in a collaborative building like Google Campus?
Well, I guess firstly, if you look at the culture in London, how much it's shifted in the last 5 years, I think that's going to spread further afield. So it's interesting to me that I'm still getting questions from, particularly Warsaw and Korean delegation startups around sharing of information and collaboration. Particularly, I remember distinctly talking to a startup founder a couple of years ago who was like, I can talk to you, but can you sign this NDA first? And I thought, wait a minute, you're picking my brains. And I think it's never about the idea, it's always about the execution. So I think first of all, that very sort of Silicon Valley culture of failure is okay, sharing is good, collaboration is good, be confident as a speaker. I think I see that filtering further afield. I think there's a lot more we can do around connecting the dots in terms of Europe and in terms of the UK and in terms of the world. And in terms of trends, I think there are a lot more vertical accelerators coming up, which is very interesting to me. Yeah. And I'm talking about social impact accelerators, women-only accelerators, farm tech accelerators. I read about one of those this week. Wow. Apparently that's massive right now. If any of you are hacking tractors, you need to get involved with that. I think that's really interesting because accelerators traditionally have always been about growth. Yeah. But not every company needs the same kind of advice in terms of growth. So I think that's really interesting.
And you want to keep being totally widespread across all industries, so you see some niches where you want to be
I think with our programs, we've done things like mums, but that's very early stage. I think the core thing of campus is open access. That's our absolute, open access, diversity, absolute focus. And I think further trends, I guess what's really appealing to me personally, apart from social impact, is really practical stuff. So I really love Square. The widget in the US hasn't taken off as much in the UK. And I think I heard a great story yesterday from a friend of mine who, Stefan Simonji, who basically advises ventures around security and for startups. He told me that he bought his Girl Scout cookies off a Girl Scout with Square. So she turned up at his door and she was like, let me just get your visa into that. And I thought, those really practical things like Airbnb, like Square, practical disruption, I think, widespread practical disruption.
So looking ahead, like 3 years from now, where do you see campus?
I guess my hope for campus is that we are the beating heart of the early stage startup scene in London. I really hope that we have a whole generation of successful founders who will come back and share their knowledge. I think that's an important piece, is getting a culture where your successful founders will come back and share. I think that's very important. And I think I would love to see an exit by then.
An exit? From the companies which have been based in Google. So any new elements which you would like to implement into the program?
Yeah, I think a couple of things we're trying out next year. We haven't really talked about this in public, so this is a bit hot off the press. So for Campus for Mums is a 9-week, 1 morning a week program. You take parents on maternity leave or paternity leave and you escalate them. So for example, in the last round we had 35 founders, one of whom was Apple's director of marketing, one of whom was BBC's head of sales. Both of whom have now left their jobs to work on their startup full time, which is very exciting. And the idea being is that they start with an idea and some user feedback, and at the end they have a business plan, a wireframe, and a go-to-market strategy. We're doing that next year for older founders, so Campus for Older Founders. And I think for me that's really appealing because we're seeing these pockets of 45 plus founders. Data shows older founders sell for more, they raise more, they're more successful. And I think personally, the last survey we did showed 15% of our audience are over 45. And we're talking people who've had these amazing corporate careers, who want to begin a company, but the language is excluding, getting started is hard. We want to help them. We want to provide a support network. And also I think there's a lot of scope for us to do more with industry. I think we've always been very careful to be community first, but I think now is the time to understand a lot of our startups want really great commercial partnerships.
Yes. Very nice. So that's a nice picture.
Basically loads.
Yeah. If you look back at the campus and you would have to do it again.
Yeah.
What would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
I think one thing that we didn't perhaps bear in mind when we launched is, to start with, we didn't have checking membership cards. We just didn't think about it too much. And I think in the first couple of weeks, we were like, how do we control the flow of people into the building? That was one thing. You know, how do you, I think particularly, we're on a bit of a side street, but I think particularly our cafe, it is a cafe, but it's also a workspace. And I think we didn't want it to be a cafe where you can just come in, have coffee and have a natter. We wanted it to be somewhere where you come in and get to work.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing. I think another thing is, you know, a few times we've tried programs that haven't perhaps worked as well as we would have liked, but the whole point of doing this is learning and doing it again faster, quicker, better, more.
Yeah. Do you have any use of those data from the cards, or it's just...
I think we're working better. I think we're doing a lot more work on that. We don't, you know, right now, the only way that we use that data is just tracking big numbers. We don't share that with anyone. It's very much sort of private in terms of campus. I think there's a lot more we could do with that, and we will do with that. Mm-hmm. In terms of, you know, helping match you with other people, helping kind of put you in touch with other campuses.
Very cool. So now we're going to have, if you guys are okay with that, are you okay with having 5-10 minutes more for questions, Q&A? And we look into Slido and we look into your physical questions. So the first question from Slido is, what would you say to a entrepreneur in a full-time job, break his fear and pursue a full-time startup?
So I guess, what's the worst thing that could happen? I have left jobs and careers twice now with nothing to go to, and a rent to pay, now mortgage to pay. I guess the way that I think about it is, I have met so many unsuccessful founders who have amazing jobs now. Whether they're founders now, whether they work for a massive company, I think if you have an idea that will not leave you alone, you owe it to yourself to pursue it. That's all I would say, is getting started is the absolute hardest thing you would do. And yeah, being an entrepreneur is not easy, but ultimately it's meaningful. It's your own thing, you've created it. If you have that idea, I think just do it. And I think the whole point of campus is come there, find events that will help you. And the more that you meet other people in the same boat, the more you have friends you can talk to. A friend of mine is setting up a co-working space in Tehran, which is so exciting and so challenging. And he's having a real struggle finding local mentors. But I've got a real sense. There's loads of Iranian successful entrepreneurs living in the valley. I think it's all about tugging on those heartstrings, you know, getting them back home to mentor. And I think if you look at Plug and Play in Silicon Valley, which is a great accelerator, that was set up by a successful Iranian expat. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a global world these days, and it's all about saying, okay, you live in Silicon Valley now, but how great would it be to support this Tehran co-working space? Gaza, for example, you know, a lot of the mentors for Gaza Sky Geeks are Gazans living around the world.
Yeah. Okay, one last question. This one there?
Yes.
Hey. Hi.
I mean, I know you guys before. I'm just taking your point of, I still think the whole tech scene is very minor in terms of what people in London know. If you ask 1,000 people on the street,
yeah,
they might have read in the newspaper, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
How, I mean, you mentioned you'll try and get the industry involved. How can you get it to the wider audience?
I think that's a really good question, and I think something that I think about a lot, because most of my friends don't work in tech.
They don't know.
But increasingly, I think first of all, it's about having startups do really well. So I knew when my first fashion friend was like, "Have you heard about this company, Borrow My Doggy?" I was like, "Oh my god." They're a campus startup. I think, first of all, it's about those companies getting out there, consumer companies, because let's face it, what we do is exciting to us, but it might not be exciting to people who work in fashion. I think the first thing is getting consumer companies that get big. I think the second thing is pursuing press that's outside the tech sphere, and I'm very keen on that, having come from that side of things, very consumer-focused press. I think, of course, it's wonderful for us to be in TechCrunch and Mashable, but that's, you know, that's talking to our existing audience. I'm really keen for campus to be speaking to Good Housekeeping magazine. You know, those kind of places where, you know, my mum reads that in Gloucestershire. I think it's about saying, here's why tech is a nice thing. Here's how Uber can help you get back from the shops on time. You know, it's about getting people excited about the potential tech has to change the way that we live. And I think plenty of companies out there are doing that already. It's just a matter of riding the wave. I think, you know, what's happened in the last year, certainly the time that I've been at campus, I'm increasingly getting emails from magazine companies that want to come to campus, massive corporate brands that want to come to campus, you know, Goldman Sachs who want to give money to entrepreneurs. All of these things are amazing signs. It's just a tipping point. It will come. I truly believe it will come. And I think when it comes, it's going to be big and it's going to spread throughout the entire world.
So at the moment, do you think it's a bit of a niche still?
I don't think so. I think tech is such a misnomer sometimes. Like, you know, ultimately what I do is I build communities. That's my core. That's what I love, and that's what I love to do. I think tech is simply a tool for getting things done. And I think particularly if you look at tech companies these days, the range is so massive. It's almost doing them a disservice to group them like that. I think increasingly, like I met a woman earlier who's just graduated in marketing, and again, she said tonight, it's like, if you look at what this audience is doing for jobs, it's so diverse. The community now is so diverse and getting bigger all the time. I think naturally, if you think about all of our circles, unless all of us only have friends who work in tech, which I'm kind of hoping isn't the case, we're out there talking about what we do the entire time. Every time I talk to somebody at a party, I'm trying to get the word across. I think it's our duty to be saying, hey, this is what we do and it's really fun and you should join us.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we actually pay extra attention to make it this way, because in the diversity many things are happening, because if we are just tech startups, it's going to be boring after a while.
Well, you won't keep on learning, right?
Yeah, and we want to make sure the audience can learn from our speakers, no matter what the background is, no matter what the startup is. The last question I wanna ask is, you advise entrepreneurs, you speak like an entrepreneur. When is your next company going to start?
Well, I think that's the hard thing with working in a building with everyone who's quit their jobs is, you get excited about things. I think my true passion really is building communities. I think the more that I meet founders, the more I realize that there are lots of ways in which I would not make a great founder, but hopefully I could help the community by helping advance them. And there's so much pleasure to be had in, getting this email today from this guy who's just got into Y Combinator. So that made me feel so happy.
Well done, yeah.
I think that alone is an amazing reward. And I hope in time maybe I'll start something, but certainly not yet.
Yeah. On this note, I'd like to say a big thanks to Sarah Drinkwater.